So now it's recorded. Okay, before we get started, I want to welcome everyone. This study is focusing upon the two prophecies of Josiah, which we're going to look at first at Ezekiel. And as we go through, we're going to look at the prophecy of Josiah Lich, so Revelation 9. And it's not so much going to be dealing with what's happening in the future. It's going to be focusing more upon understanding the chronology of the past and how these prophecies are connected with Millerite history. So it's really going back, looking back a little bit. Some of our other studies, maybe as we get towards the end, we'll deal more with the present. I did send some notes out, and I'm probably going to send some more notes as we go along in the study. But I welcome everyone, and before we begin, let us kneel for prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we are thankful for the time that we have, that you have given us. We know that Satan has tried to destroy the people and this message, but everything that he has done always works for your purposes. And the time that many of us have here is due to the events that are occurring around us in this world. We have time to study. But most of all, Lord, we have time to share this with others. And as we learn these things here today, we just ask that this knowledge not just remain in our minds, but that we can share it with others. Help us, Lord, to reflect your character in all that we do. We ask that these truths, this study can help us have a confidence in you, that you can work out your will in our lives. Be with each one here who is joining in these studies, those that we're all praying for, family and friends. And we just ask, Lord, that in some way we can be used to your glory. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, again, we're going to be looking at first the prophecy of Ezekiel, not so much chapter 4, verse 4 on this study, verse 4 to 6, which we're going to get into. But we're going to look at the overall chronology of Ezekiel. And there's a paper that I sent you called Reconciling Ezekiel's Chronology. And that's going to be where we're going to begin. So I'm going to share this with you now. So you should all see it. And the problem that we have in Ezekiel is one of those puzzles which, you know, I found really interesting to unwind, but I'm not sure if everybody would agree with me that it's the most enjoyable thing to do, to go through and figure these things out. It took a lot of time and study to figure out what was happening as far as the book of Ezekiel and its relationship to the book of Jeremiah and into the prophecies of Daniel's captivity and so forth. Now, if you want to speak, you can always hit your space bar, I believe, and that should unmute you if you want to ask a question. And I definitely need participation as we go along. Also, people can send information through the chat, though I don't always look at it right away. So if it's something that we need to address right at that moment, you can do that. If it's a question, you can always email me. I do look at all the chats at the end after I finish recording. I look at the different chats, comments and questions, and sometimes I respond to them, sometimes I don't, in emails, but I may. So let's first turn to Ezekiel chapter 40, verse 1. Now, it's right here in our notes, so it's easy to look at. And it says, in the 25th year of our captivity, in the beginning of the year, the 10th day of the month, in the 14th year after the city was smitten. In the selfsame day, the hand of the Lord was upon me and brought me thither. So Ezekiel chapter 40, verse 1 is kind of a strange place to start our study. And I hope people can see, I know on my computer where I'm also joined, I can see this fairly well. It's pretty tiny letters. But we have here this line on the bottom, and this is also in your book a little bit. It just goes up to 25. And these are the years of the captivity. So we would start back here, year 1 of the captivity, and Ezekiel chapter 40 is written over here in year 25. Now, of course, this is a very simplistic way of looking at things, because in trying to take this line, we have to be able to connect it to history, to know what he means by the 25th year of the captivity. Now, he also talks about that the 25th year of the captivity is the 14th year of the captivity. And so you'll see you have this chart just a little further down the page. And it will say that this year is going to be the same year. And so if I go like this and I say that this is the 14th year, 13th, 12th, 11th, 10th, 9th, 8th. So I'm going to just show that to you here. Stop.
Hey, Theodore, I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm wondering if you're going to cover one aspect. I read this paper, but I'm looking for, kind of some more detail on one particular point. And if you're going to cover it later in your presentation, you can ignore the question. But I'm looking to understand the 0.5 a bit better and the verses that you've derived that 0.5 from on the 391.5. And I'm struggling with that right now. So are you going to cover that today?
Yes, I'm going to cover that today. I'm going to try to get through. That's going to be in the second half of this that I'm going to cover that. So to go through this part of the chronology, to make sure that it's understood, is important to understand that part of it, that 0.5. So
thank you.
Okay. Now, hopefully you can see the whiteboard here. You can see the numbers. And so it's also in your notes. Now, in the way that it's written, it says the 5 and 20th year and the 14th year. Now, this language that we have is ordinal. 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th. It's not 25 years after the captivity began, at least in the language of it. And it's not 14 years after the city was smitten. It's the 14th year. And so this is, if he had said it's 14 years, but he meant the 14th, that would be what we call inclusive reckoning. So I know there's some misunderstandings what we mean by inclusive. So if you say that Jesus is going to be resurrected on the 3rd day, he was resurrected on the 3rd day, that's not inclusive. That's just ordinal, 1st, 2nd, 3rd. If you said that he was going to be resurrected after 3 days, that could mean, in just the normal count of things, what we would call the 4th day. But when Jesus talks about after 3 days and the 3rd day, and we know that they're the same thing, after 3 days is actually inclusive, where the 3rd day is not inclusive reckoning. So when you express things in a cardinal way, but you are actually expressing the ordinal way. You're trying to express the ordinal number, but in a cardinal way. That's called inclusive reckoning. So I usually try to avoid the term inclusive reckoning because it becomes confusing. So anyway, this is an ordinal count, the 14th year and the 25th year. Now, when the city was smitten is clear from other scriptures. So I'm not going to go through every detail of this, but when we look at these passages, so I'm going to go back to sharing this page here. And we look at these passages here. We have from 2 Kings, from Jeremiah, and Ezekiel, some passages that talk about when the city was destroyed and when the siege began. So let's look at this one in 2 Kings 25, verse 1 to 2. And it came to pass in the 9th year of his reign, in the 10th month, in the 10th day of the month, that Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came, he and all his host, against Jerusalem, and pitched against it. And they built forts against it round about, and the city was besieged unto the 11th year of King Zedekiah. So in trying to understand this, the way that this is counted, we know that the 9th year of his reign is a period of time that doesn't count that he's been reigning 9 years. He could be reigning at various different lengths of time, depending on when his reign began. So when a king begins to reign, the first year that he begins to reign is not called his first year. Well, sometimes it is, but it is also his accession year. It's the last year of the previous king's reign. And so his first year of reign, in a technical sense, does not begin either in the spring or the fall, depending on how that king counts his reign. So there's a lot of disagreement among chronologists on how Zedekiah counted his reign. Did he count it spring to spring, or did he count it fall to fall? Now we see the same thing in Jeremiah 39, in the 9th year of his reign, in the 10th month. It's basically the same thing. In the 11th year of Zedekiah, in the 4th month, in the 9th day of the month, the city was broken up. So this gives us a little bit more detail in Jeremiah. And so I'm going to go to the whiteboard and write this out and try to understand what's being talked about. So now we're just going to deal with Zedekiah's reign itself. And so we're going to write out the years of his reign here. Now, the thing about it is his first year is not the year that he began to reign. This is, and we're going to look at it the way that I understand it, that this is a spring to spring year. So he's going to have a 0th year. So this is going to be his accession year. So somewhere in this year, he began to reign, but the first year of his reign is not going to be counted into the spring of some year. Now it says in the Bible that it's in the 11th year of his reign the city was broken up. So if we're going to put it here, it's in the 9th day of the 4th month. So it's the 9th day of the 4th month. In the 11th year of his reign. So this date is July 18th. And it is 586 BC. Now, we know exactly when Zedekiah began to reign. And we know this from the Babylonian Chronicles. And this is in the 7th year of Nebuchadnezzar that Jehoiachin is taken captive by Nebuchadnezzar. And then Zedekiah is placed upon the throne. Now, I dealt with this in one of the other studies, but I'm just going to put this here, that it's here that Zedekiah begins to reign. So Zedekiah begins to reign here, and he has a long accession year. So I'm going to get rid of this 0. I'm just going to write accession, so AC. So this is his accession year. Now, one of the disputes that comes about is that many people believe that he actually reigned fall to fall. And so if he reigned fall to fall, you would have his first year begin a half a year earlier. And then this date here would still fall within his 11th year. And I'm going to deal with that a little bit more when I go through the chronology of the kings. But this date here, dates that fall between the first day of the first month and the first day of the seventh month, aren't affected by the first year, by the beginning of the reign starting in the spring or the fall. So I'm not going to explain how that is here right now. So it doesn't affect, the 11th year is still the fourth month, whether you count spring to spring or fall to fall, would still be July 18th, 586 BC, because the months are always counted from the spring. Where it does affect it is in the beginning of the siege here. So it says that the siege began in which month, according to the passage we read?
The 10th month.
Okay, so 10th month, the 9th year of the 10th month. Now, to try to, I'm just going to draw this here temporarily. So if I have, I said I wasn't going to really explain this, but I'm going to explain. So you have some years going like this. What's the best way to do this? So I have, let's say I have a spring to spring year. So this is a year on our calendar. So let's say this is the year 587. I don't know how I'm going to do this, whether it's going to work or not. So let's say we have this year 587 BC. And you're always going to have these months numbered the same. So you have this now. I'm going to have, 588 over here and 586 over here. Now, of course, this is going to be January 1st. Now, the Hebrew months will line up in a way that is going to be that you're going to have the first month, no matter what you're doing, the first month's always going to be in the spring. So I'm going to put, let's say here we'll have the 10th month, the 11th month, 12th month, and then you're going to have the first month, second month, third month, fourth month, fifth month, sixth month, seventh month, eighth month, ninth month. So this would be in the year 587. You're always going to have your month, your first month begin in the spring, whether it's a spring to spring or a fall to fall calendar. So the months will be numbered the same. So let's say this is going to be a spring to spring calendar, and this is going to be a fall to fall. So obviously you're going to have the 9th month is going to be over here. Now, if it's a spring to spring calendar, this month here begins the next year. But if it's a fall to fall calendar, this will fall over here. This is going to be the year from here to here. So this would be year to year. We'll call it 587, but it would be the year of a king's reign. Well, in this case, we wanted to put it like this, I guess. Since this is 5, I'm going to change the years here. I'm not going to deal with the speed so much. Yeah, maybe I should. Okay, I'm going to do it here. So let's say this is the 9th year. So this is the 9th year of Zedekiah. And you can see that in the 9th year, this is a fall to fall calendar. Right? Now, if it's a spring to spring calendar, and I think I might be doing this the wrong way. If it's a spring to spring calendar, you're going to have this year. Let's get rid of these dates here. You're going to have the 9th year begin in the spring. and it's going to go all the way over to here. So you see that they will overlap for the first 6 months of this year. But one of the things that you will notice that the 10th month here, I'm going to put this here. So this is 598, or 588, pardon me. And this is 586. So let's get. So this is ours. I don't know how to get this without messing it up. 588. So 588 is going to end there. And this is going to be 587. And this is going to be 586. And you may not be able to explain this, but you should be able to understand this. That in this year 588, and 587, and 586, we say that it's in the 9th year, and it's in the spring to spring year. So I might have got the years in the wrong place. That's right. So let's do it this way. Okay, let's say he had a fall to fall calendar. The 9th year is going to go from the beginning of the 7th month to the end of the 6th month. And the 10th month and the 10th day of the month would lie here in this year. And the question is, what year is this? Now, if we have a fall to fall calendar, this is going to bring this to the year 5, I always put 9, but it's 588. Now, if this is 588, and this is the 10th month, and this is the 9th year, you'll see that the 9th year and the 10th month is over here, 587. If you go spring to spring. So if you start your year in the spring, the 10th month, because you start from the spring, the first day of the first month, and you're going to count, the 10th month would be at the beginning of 587. But if you counted fall to fall, the 9th year, the 10th month is way over here, 1 year earlier. And so this is the problem, one of the problems that arise. It's okay if you're looking at the 9th year, anything happening in the 9th year that's going to happen from the 1st to the 6th month, it's going to be the same. Because these line up. These years, spring to spring and fall to fall, line up in the first 6 months. So only dates that are on the 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, or 13th month, if you have it, are affected by a spring to spring or fall to fall calendar. So if we change this now to the 11th year, so let's do this as the 11th year. So this is the year that the siege ended. We aren't affected by any of this. So this is now going to be 586. And you can see anything that's happening in 586, whether you have a spring to spring or fall to fall calendar, as long as it's happening in these months, from the spring to the fall, it's still going to overlap the same. So when they say that the city was smitten in the 4th month on the 9th day of the month, it's not affected by whether you have a spring to spring or a fall to fall calendar. So I want that point to be understood because it does affect Ezekiel in ways that people have argued for a spring to spring or a fall to fall calendar in Ezekiel. Now, my view is that Ezekiel uses 2 different calendars. He uses a spring to spring calendar when he's counting the reign of Zedekiah. And he's using a fall to fall calendar when he's counting the years of the siege. And this is what creates the confusion in Ezekiel, because things don't seem to line up if you use a spring to spring calendar for all of his dates or a fall to fall calendar for all of his dates. And this problem, as far as I know, nobody has ever thought of a solution where you have him using 2 different calendars or 2 different ways of counting the number of years between events. And as I said, it only affects those dates that are from the 7th month to the 1st month, not from the 1st month to the 7th month. So any questions on that point? Because we're going to start looking at this. I'm going to go back to the sharing the screen here and looking at our notes.
I have a question, but it's not so much on that point. You said that the 9th day of the 4th month is the 18th of July,
Yes.
but the calendar converter gives it as the 19th of July. Can you explain that discrepancy?
Yes, I'm going to explain that discrepancy as we get further on. So this is a point, because I always took the position the 19th of July until I started looking at some more details regarding Ezekiel, and so we're going to come to that because this thing is a really important thing, because it's interesting. It's the 18th of July, and I came to that conclusion for a couple of reasons, which I'm going to get into later on. The calendar converter is correct as far as the way you would calculate the calendar according to the rules of the biblical calendar. My argument is that he's not using the biblical calendar here. So we'll see why I come to that conclusion. Okay, so I'm going to share the screen here again. We'll go back to our notes. So we can see here these dates dealing with the 9th and the 11th year. The 9th year is when the city was broken, and also, or when the siege began in the 9th year, the 10th day of the 10th month. And then in the 11th year, that's when the king of Babylon came in and destroyed Jerusalem. And he started on the 4th month, the 9th day of the month. The city was broken up, so that's when the walls came down. And then later on, we'll see that on the 10th day of the 5th month is when the temple was destroyed by Nebuzaradan, his captain. Now, all those things that I talked about, I wrote them out here, when the siege begins and the siege ends. So you can look at that at your leisure much better than I drew it. But I like drawing it out because when you just look at an image, sometimes there's too much to look at. And you can't really sort what's happening. But you can see here we have that overlap. So now what we want to do is we first want to reconcile the 25th year with the 11th year. So there is a problem when we look at this chart. Because if you're going to use, so we'll go back actually up to, instead of me going to the note up there, I'll go back on the notes. We're going to go back up to that first chart. And if you look at this chart and you say the 14th year is the 25th year, so you're matching those years together. But then you look at the 12th year and it's the first year. Now, so technically speaking, in an ordinal sense, that would mean that the city would have had to have been destroyed, the city would have had to have been smitten in the 12th year of the captivity. And so the question is, why are we counting the 12th year of the captivity? Is it the same as the 11th year of Zedekiah? So if we were going to say that the city was smitten in the 11th year of Zedekiah, the 14th year would line up with the 24th year, because the first year would line up with the 11th year. So I hope that makes sense, that you see this problem, and people have tried to solve it in different ways. So one is they just ignore the language, and they will just say, well, it's 14 years since the city was smitten, and it's the 25th year of the captivity. So they're actually using they're counting one of them cardinal and the other ordinal. And actually, originally, that's how I took it, because that was the only way I could reconcile it. We'll keep looking ahead here. And so we're going to start just by trying to reconcile the 25th year with the 11th year. So obviously, if you do simple math and you subtract 11 from 14, you get 25. But we're using cardinal math. That's math that contains a 0. So sometimes people just don't even notice. They just say, oh, it's 25th and 14th, and you subtract 14 from 25 and you get 11. But you see, they're not recognizing that they're using a cardinal count when they do that. They just use the math, and that's what I did. I just said 25 minus 14 is 11, so that's the first year. But actually, if I really thought about it, the first year would have been the 12th year, not the 11th year. So I didn't notice this till later. It wasn't in 2016 that I finally sorted this out. So the 14th year from when the city was smitten would be counted spring to spring, while the years of the captivity are counted fall to fall. This is the only true if the beginning of the year mentioned is the 10th day of the 7th month, since the Hebrew for this passage is the beginning of the year. So let's look at this passage itself and see what it talks about. So I'm going to go to my Bible program. And we're going to look at the language here. So I got my Hebrew numbers here as well. And it says, in the 25th year of our captivity, in the beginning of the year. Now, you will actually have some translations that put this, and a lot of commentaries that will say, well, the beginning of the year is going to be in the spring, because that's when you begin to count the months. And so that this says, people will interpret this as the 10th day of Nisan, which is the first month in the spring. But if you look at the Hebrew, this word beginning, and you probably can't see that there if I hold this out, so I'll read it. It just says Rosh. And Rosh means lots of different things, but it means beginning. So you can use it as the word beginning. It also is translated head. So literally it means head of the year. Rosh is actually one of the letters of the Hebrew alphabet, Resh, and it means head, and it's shaped like a head, like a profile of a head. And but then it says this next word, Rosh, and it says Shana. Now, how many people know what Rosh Hashanah is? Anybody want to comment?
A Jewish holiday?
It's a Jewish holiday, and it's their new year, right? And it happens in the fall. It happens, normally it's on the first day of the 7th month. Now, I'm just going to show you here, even though you probably can't read Hebrew, but if you look at it here, it's right here. It says Rosh Hashanah, and it has the ha, the H in front of it, the H sound. It's a het, ha, and it makes the H sound. So it says Rosh Hashanah. Now, Rosh Hashanah then is in the fall, not in the spring. But it also says something quite interesting as well, that it says it's on the 10th day of the month. And all of the Hebrew commentaries, when they address Ezekiel 40 verse 1, they say that when Rosh Hashanah falls on the 10th day of the 7th month, it's a Jubilee year. So let's take a look at this here. I'm going to go back to the whiteboard, and I drew this up here. Now, I didn't actually finish the drawing of it. Okay, before we even go there, let's look at Ezekiel 1:1. So before we go up there, I'm going to just bring back this. So Ezekiel 1:1 says something very interesting. Now, we've also noticed this because in the context of our message, the 30th year. But it says, now it came to pass in the 30th year, in the 4th month, in the 5th day of the month, as I was among the captives by the river of Kibar, that the heavens were opened and I saw visions of God. So I'm going to go back to the whiteboard. And we're going to put Ezekiel 1:1 right here. So we're going to have Ezekiel 1:1, the 5th day of the 4th month, and it's in the 5th year of Jehoiachin's captivity. So to put it over here, we would now say it's here. This is the 5th day of the 4th month, and it's in the 5th year. So these are the same years. So there's 2 different counts that Ezekiel's using. He's using one count, the year of the captivity, and he puts this date, the 5th day of the 4th month, in the 5th year, but he also puts it in the 30th year of some event. And people have made assumptions regarding that. They would assume, well, maybe Ezekiel's 30 years old. But that doesn't really make much sense in the context of what he's talking about. Now, he doesn't say in my 30th year. It's in the 30th year. And he would have actually referenced it differently. He would have written it in a different expression if he was talking about how old he was. But the thing is, when you're 30, you can become a priest. And so there is symbolic significance regarding the 30 as him being a priest. But he's also referencing some event. And so the question is, what is the event that he's referencing? Now, as far as putting this in a year on our calendar, which is kind of what we're doing, we're going to say that this is July 21st, 592 BC. Now, if I'm going to count backwards here, I'm going to find, this is 92, 93, 94, 5, 6, 7, 60. I'm doing that back wrong. $600, 1, 2, 3, 610. I'm terrible at counting backwards like this. Anyway, we're gonna say that this here is going to be. I think I did it right. And we're going to use this as a calendar that's going spring to spring. So we're just going to count it as a spring to spring calendar. And so we will say that this is the spring of 622 BC. Okay, so if you count here from 592 and you come back here, you're going to come back to the spring of 622. So, you could count these years, 22, 23, 24. 622, I've got to go backwards. Anyway, don't worry about it now. I'm not going to count. I always get mixed up counting backwards. So we got spring of 622 BC, and then this is going to be the first year, second year, third year, fourth year, fifth year, and we come all the way up here to 592 BC. Now, there is, in a sense, a little bit of a problem in that, because if you counted this and you counted this as the first year, you would normally actually only have 29 years between these two events, because I don't have a 0 year here. So this is a problem if you were going to count this as 30 years. So it's really 29 years from here to here. I hope that makes sense to people. So, but it's the 30th year. And so in trying to understand this date, it's still, we're going to have to look at that in a bit more detail. I know it gets confusing looking at how we count these things. And the counting is a problem. It took me a long time to learn how to count properly. So we're going to say that it's in the spring of 622 BC that we're going to have this first year. But it's not quite correct yet. So we're going to see why. Now, but he's counting in the 30th year of the captivity, and he's also counting in the 5th year of King Jehoiachin's, or the 30th year, and also in the 5th year of Jehoiachin's captivity. So we have these two counts. It'd be nice to have them lined up. So I could do this. I could just put the 30th here, 29, 28, 27, 26. So I'm going to do that. And I probably should put it above, because I got here, these are the years of the captivity. These are the years since the city was smitten. And so if I really wanted to do this properly, I would put the 30th year here, the 31st, the 32nd, and so on. I won't draw all the numbers in, I'll mark the marks. Now, if I go along like this, and I'm just doing this as spring to spring, I'm going to run into a problem. 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, 49.
Question.
Yeah. Yes, Dana.
It says in Ezekiel 1:1, it says the 4th month of the 5th day. So why are you putting it at the 5th month?
Did I write the fifth day of the 4th month? It's the 5th day of the 4th month. Why am I writing it backwards, you mean?
On the chart, you have above number 5.
The 5th year?
Should it be?
5th day of the 4th month? I'm not sure what you're asking.
Well, you're starting your counting on the number 5?
Yeah, the 5th year. That's the 5th year. The 5th year
Oh, those are years.
activity,
Okay.
and it's the 5th day of the 4th month. So there's 2 different 5s there. The 5th day, the 5th year, but it's the 4th month. Does that help? Is that clear?
Yes, thank you.
Thanks. So I know I'm kind of confusing people a little bit as we're going through this, but hopefully we can all bring it together. And I want you to be able to think about it. That's why I'm doing it this way. Because I could just explain it and tell you, but I want you to sort of see the problems that we face as we try to work out these spans of time that are given to us in Ezekiel and try to figure out why they don't appear to line up properly. Now, so here we have, according to the Jews, that the 50th year is the year of Jubilee. And they're arguing that here in Ezekiel 40, so this is Ezekiel 40, and they're saying that this is the 10th day of the 7th month, that the Jubilee is beginning. And the Jubilee begins in the 50th year. Now, you can see when I put these lines here for this count doesn't really line up properly if this is going to be a Jubilee year. So let's backtrack a little bit. What they're assuming is that the 30th year in Ezekiel 1:1 is the 30th year of the sabbatical cycle, or the Jubilee cycle specifically. And that over here in Ezekiel 40, so you got Ezekiel 1:1. And it talks about the 30th year. But over here, the 25th year of the captivity and the 14th year since the city was smitten, they're going to say is also the 50th year. But that 50th year then would not begin in the spring. So I got all these spring to spring stuff here. They would say that begins in the fall. And so what they would mark is that this is the 50th year, and this is the 49th year. And so I would have to move all these lines, instead of being in the spring, I should do a bit more like this. I'll put it halfway, that's better. So I put these lines halfway. So this is the count of the sabbatical and Jubilee cycle. It's a little more complicated than this. But if I put these lines in the middle, you can see then I'm going fall to fall. But that doesn't affect this spring part here. So we're going to call this The 50th year is over here. This is the 49th, 48, 47, 46, 45, 44, 43, 42, 41. And what am I doing wrong? So I'm doing something wrong, which I always do. Okay, so we're going to go spring. So I need to do this. I need to say this is the 30th. And this is the 31st. And for some reason, I always do this wrong, and I have no idea why. And then I always figure it out later. Yeah, there we go. Okay, there's the problem. So I'd moved that too far that way. So now what we have to say is the 25th year, when we look at this and we look at this 25th year, that's what I did wrong. I'm going to erase that. I always make the same mistake every time I do it. This 25th year, then, is fall to fall. So I have to remember that. And it's the one on the bottom we're going to move. So this is the 30th year, first, second, third. So 31st, 32nd, 33rd, 34th. So when you come up to this, you'll find that this is the 50th year. Okay. And this is the point that I'm trying to make. And when we count this year, the year that the city was smitten, what we don't know with this is this spring to spring or fall to fall. What we're going to say is that all of these are fall to fall. So that means if this year of the Jubilee is going to line up with the 30th year being the 5th year of the captivity, the only way it can work out is if both of these are fall to fall. If I try to make one spring to spring and one fall to fall, it doesn't work out. And you could see I did it because I always do it wrong, and then I correct it, and then I see it works out. So that means this 10th day of the 7th month is here, and it's going to be related to this. Now we're going to say that this is 592 BC, and if we're counting fall to fall, this here, so I'm going to put this up here. When we get from this 30th year to here, this is going to be 573 BC. And this date in 573 BC is October 22nd. And this date over here is July 18th, right? Now, or pardon me, not July 18th, July 21st. So we have July 21st, 592 BC, and October 22nd, 573 BC. Now, when we count this now, we notice something, that these years from here to here appear to be 20 years apart. but they're actually, when you look at the calendar here, they're 19 years apart. So if you add 19 to 573, it matches up to here. And that's because we have from the 30th to the 25th, looks like 20 years. So I hope everybody's a little bit confused there. Can people see what the problem is, or why I need to now introduce another calendar? I have to introduce a spring to spring calendar. So when we look at it here now, we're doing this count. It looks like 20 years, right? Because 30 plus 20 is 50. But you can see on our calendar, it's only 19 years apart. And that's because this is marking the beginning of a fall to fall year. And that means this is actually in the second half of the year. So let's try to do it this way. I'm going to just add these halfway marks like this. So I'm going to put the spring to spring years here now. So let's get rid of that. So if we're going to be looking at the spring to spring, Ezekiel 1:1, in this 5th year of Jehoiachin's captivity, this has to be fall to fall. And then we're going to have in the second half of this year, so this is the fall, and this is the fall, so the year will actually begin in the spring. And so that means that that 5th day of the 4th month is happening here, right? It's not happening, this is not like our years, because we have 2 different years. They're staggered apart. Now, when you do that count, and you go along and you count, this is the 1st year, and you're going to count the years. You're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and that's going to put your 19th year here. So this is your 19 years, if we're counting cardinally, right? And so you can see that this part is happening here in this part of the year, not in this part of the year. So when you count from here, it's actually the 10th day of the 7th month. This crosses over into this next year. And I hope that makes sense to people. So if I didn't take into account the spring to spring and the fall to fall calendar, I wouldn't be able to reconcile that 30th year as part of the Jubilee cycle. But it also creates another issue that's going to arise, because we're dealing with the years of the captivity here, and we're arguing that the years of the captivity are fall to fall. But the year of Zedekiah's reign are not the years of the captivity. They're different. Zedekiah's reign is going spring to spring. And so this would be the 11th year. So now I'm just going to do Zedekiah. This would be the 10th year. This would be the 9th year. And so this is a spring to spring. And so we're going to find that this 11th year of Zedekiah overlaps with the 12th year of the captivity. And it's in this period of time here where the 11th year and the 12th year overlap on this part. Pardon me, it's in this part here. This is the spring. So it's this part here where the 11th year overlaps with part of the 12th year that we are now counting. So the 12th year of the captivity is going to start a year earlier. I should do it this way. This is the 11th year. The 12th year of the captivity is going to start a half a year earlier than the year of his reign. So when we say that this is the 12th year of the captivity, we're going to find also then that the first year since the city was smitten is also not going to line up quite the same way. when we get over here, then we have this overlap. So we're going to have a spring to spring. So remember, the 25th year begins right here, but the 14th year is going to go like this. And I hope people are getting what I'm doing. So the first year of the captivity begins in the 11th year. So this is ordinal count in the 11th year of from spring to spring. And this fits perfectly. So when he's counting the 14th year since the city was smitten, he's counting spring to spring. And when he's counting the 25th year of the captivity, he's counting fall to fall. And he's also counting the Jubilee cycle. So we have a few different confirmations that this works. And this is the only way that you can get this to work without, you know, modifying things, trying to say, well, maybe he's not counting, you know, like just assuming that one is cardinal. But when you reconcile it this way, it keeps the language consistent. So I know that is a very long explanation. I hope everybody's not gone to sleep. Now you need to try to work some of these things out yourself because this is essential. So for the first time that anybody ever thought of this solution was in 2016. When I was at the School of Prophets, we were having a discussion regarding this, and there was some strong disagreements between the way that I was trying to count Ezekiel's timeline and Jeremiah's as well. We haven't even really tried to address that too much. So at that time, I worked on this puzzle for a long, long time, and I came to basically a dead end. And it was in a dream that I had where this solution was given to me. And so it was pretty fascinating for me personally to all of a sudden have this answer of something that people have struggled with for hundreds, thousands of years. Ever since Ezekiel wrote this book, probably, people have tried to figure out how to count these years. Now it's going to relate, in the next part, we're going to go through Ezekiel's prophecy. We're going to go through the prophecy of Josiah. And we're going to see how this all fits together. So I know it's not something that, I don't think everybody's got this yet. It's not something that you can just look at. Unless you've looked at it a lot in the past, you're probably not going to be able to grasp what's happening there. But it is something you should try to work out yourself, just like I worked it out now. Try to draw out these dates, try to look at these spans. And sometimes I look at it, it doesn't look right. And then I realize, oh, I did this wrong. Now, that being said, when you look at the book of Ezekiel, now we have Ezekiel's chronology later on in the book. So we have one where we have a span of all of his visions. That's on page 4 of our notes. So I'm going to just bring those up. So if we look at these diagrams here, this diagram, I've written this all out for you, so it's all solved, so to speak. Now, there's a struggle that I've had, and you'll see that I have in this one, so I haven't updated this yet. And I'm going to answer that question of Stephen's. The end of the siege I have is July 19th, 586, the 9th day, the 4th month, the 11th year. Now, I've only recently come to the conclusion that Ezekiel is not using the biblical calendar. And I'm not going to go into all the explanations of it, but the simple way that you would look at it is that Ezekiel is where? Where is Ezekiel when he's having his visions? Just to try to keep you awake. Where is Ezekiel when he's having these visions?
He's in Babylon.
He's in Babylon, and he was taken captive when Jehoiachin was taken captive. So he's in Babylon. Now, we often have this idea about calendars, and calendars are sort of these these fixed things, you know, that they're very. But when we have a calendar, we have a calendar that's been decided long before, and we hang it on the wall. But they had a calendar that was by observation. And I've said this before, that it's almost by consensus. You know, there isn't really an overruling authority that's going to tell you when the month begins, at least early on. People would sort of have the sense of when the month is based upon how everybody else looked at things. And so they don't have this idea that we don't know of any disputes in ancient history. People are arguing when the month started that month. It's sort of like, if everybody thinks the month started, well, then the month began, right? So it must be the first day of the month. All my neighbors think that, even though I maybe saw the new moon, I thought a day earlier. You know, they say, well, no, you know, it was too cloudy and nobody saw it. So there's this type of thing. There's a kind of a consensus. So Ezekiel's in Babylon, and the Babylonians are observing the months. One is, Ezekiel's not in Jerusalem. He can't observe the new moon in Jerusalem. He doesn't have communication about that. And so just from a simple point of view, he's going to be using the Babylonian calendar. Now, I had an appendix here. Now, this isn't as easy to read because I blew it up from Parker and Duberstein's book. But if you look here at the years and the months, you'll see in 586 BC, the first day of the first month. So you'll see the 19th year of Nebuchadnezzar, and it'll say 586. So that's, here, I'll just bring it up here. See at the top. So there you can see the 19th year on the left side, and it's going to have the months, and the months, which days they start on our calendar. So the first day of the first month is going to be April 13th. And then the 12th day of the fifth, or the first day of the second month, is going to be the 12th of May. And then you can see the third month's going to be on the 11th of June. And then the fourth month is going to begin on the 10th day of July. So if you count to the 9th day, you're going to count 10 as 1. So 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. So the 18th day of July is the 9th day of the fourth month on the calendar, or on the Babylonian calendar. And it doesn't make sense that Ezekiel would be using the Jewish calendar, which he can't determine by observation because he's not in Jerusalem, and that he would use calendar as it was understood by the people around him. Now, people could argue the point that maybe it's not correct, but there are some other reasons which I don't want to go into because it's too long of explanation. But when you look at Ezekiel's visions, interesting things arise when we start to use the Babylonian calendar instead of the biblical calendar. Okay, now if somebody yeah, I don't, somebody's just asking about if I can make things bigger. I'm not sure how to do that. There might be a way. Maybe if somebody can explain how I can make this bigger. I think I can do something with the video and make things bigger when I have these. But anyway, so the point that I'm making here is that I believe that Ezekiel is the Babylonian calendar. So that's basically those dates I then derived from the Babylonian calendar. So I changed them. So if you look at in the visions here, it says ninth day. Yeah, in this chart, it's going to say the 19th day of July. 586 is the 9th day of the fourth month. But that's just, that's a disputed date. But there's other reasons when we're going to start looking at Ezekiel's literal 390 and 40 days, why we adopt the Babylonian calendar. So we're going to take a bit of a break, and then we're going to look at the prophecy of Ezekiel chapter 4. So the prophecy of Josiah. And we're going to do first a cursory look at it here. We're probably not going to get all the details, but we're going to have the overview of it, the way that I understood it back in 2016 at least. And later on that we're going to look at the implications of that prophecy in related to other events. So I'm gonna take a break.
How long's the break for?
Basically 5 minutes. I'm gonna erase this board and draw the line up there, and then so 5 minutes, just so people can have a washroom break or something, or stretch their legs. So we'll be here.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I welcome everyone back. And we're now going to look at the prophecy in Ezekiel chapter 40, or chapter 4. Now, before we do that, I just want to go through an overview of some of the reasons why I came to the conclusion that I did regarding the chronology of the kings of Judah. And this actually goes back to the study I did yesterday on Leviticus 26, where I went through the 70 years captivity and how Leviticus 26 was fulfilled during the Babylonian captivity. Some of you may know this quite well too from other studies. Some of you, if you haven't seen this before, I recommend that you read some of the other papers that I gave. So we came to understand 677 BC as Manasseh's captivity. So this is Manasseh. He's taken captive in 677. And we came to the conclusion that Daniel's taken captive in 607, and that Cyrus succeeds to the throne in 537. And this is in the fall. This is in the fall. And this is the 70 years, what we call the 70 years Babylonian captivity. 20 later, which we're going to look at next Wednesday, we're going to look at the 3 decrees. But Darius' decree falls 21 years after Cyrus comes to the throne. There's actually more than 20 years between the 2 decrees, according to Ellen White. Now, in studying this, we came to the conclusion that this 70-year captivity was based upon 490 years of transgression of the sabbatical cycle. And we went all the way back to Saul being king. And then this is going to be Jeroboam. And Jeroboam, of course, we got Rehoboam is king of Judah. Jeroboam's the king of Israel. This is the divided kingdom. And you'll see that there's 40 years, 40 years, and 40 years for Saul, David, Solomon. And if we take this 490 years, and we say that there's 490 years where there's 70 sabbatical cycles that they did not have the land rest, then this is the rest that the land is going to have to make up for these 490 years of transgression of the sabbatical cycle. Now, we can see that there's first 420 years, which is 6 times 70 years, from when Saul becomes king to when Manasseh is taken captive, and that's the first 7 times. So the pride of their power is broken. And then they have a 70 years period of probation, and it's in this period where we have Josiah. He's not at the beginning of it, but Josiah tries to do this reform, and he dies in 609, and 2 years later, Daniel's taken captive. And so it's this period of reform, this period of probation, in which they fail, and the Babylonian captivity begins, and it's going to be 70 years, because it's added to this period of 70 years. That's kind of a real simple summary of Leviticus 26, the first 2 of the 7 times. They're added together, they're prolonged to be a period of 140 years. And so this Josiah here, this becomes an important part in understanding the prophecy of Josiah in Ezekiel chapter 4. Now, one of the things that we look at here to even add to this is we know that the laying of the foundation of Solomon's temple began in the 4th year of his reign. And then it was completed in the 7th year, or 7 years it was in building, in the 11th year. And so I can take this and take this period of time over here, 91 years. And so this is a period of 91 years from when Saul is king to when the temple is built. And then I can go over here and just take this year in which the temple is completed, and I can put, I can count the periods of the years here. So if you go from here to here, this is a period of 70 years. And this from here to here is a period of 21 years. And 70 plus 21 is 91. And so I can go from here to here and demonstrate that from when Solomon's temple is built to when the second temple is built is a period of 490 years. And it lays in desolation for 70 years, and for 420 years, it exists. So this idea of this sabbatical cycle also can be seen in a weekly cycle. 10 times 70 years until Manasseh's captivity, another 70 years, and then Daniel's 70 years of rest. But you can see the same thing with the temple itself. The temple is built, it exists for 420 years, and then 70 years it lays in desolation, and then it's rebuilt here. So this was this confirmation that I had initially, even before I worked out all the chronologies of the kings of Judah and Israel, that I had this structure. And I'd worked this out in 2014, this structure, which I thought was pretty remarkable. And it was just based on this assumption that the 70 years captivity is based on 490 years of transgression. So hopefully that's simple enough for people. Now I don't have this written in any notes here right now. I'm going to send you some notes. Some of the other studies have these notes. But the fact that this could possibly work out in this way, to me, was very remarkable. So I'm going to erase this because I just needed to get this part here. I'm going to keep the top line up there, but I'm going to erase all this other stuff. So I think that we have this solid reasoning for where we place this year, the year when the kingdom is divided. And we know that an event happens on that year, and that's on the 15th day of the 8th month on the biblical calendar, where Jeroboam has this feast day and he offers. And we know this is a symbol of the midnight cry. So, because August 15th, at Exeter in 1844, the midnight cry is empowered. So we can see that this symbol exists here back in 977. Now, let's look at Ezekiel chapter 4, verse 4. And now there's a number of things I'm just going to skip here right now. We're going to come back to them later when we look at, in another lecture, we're going to look at the literal 390 days and the 40 days. And we're not going to deal with that right now, but we're just going to look at the basic line of this prophecy of Ezekiel, how I understood it in 2016 when it was first solved. So in Ezekiel 1:1, it starts on the 5th day of the 4th month. And so we're going to put that here. We're going to say somewhere here, this is July 21st, 592 BC, and it's the 5th day of the 4th month, and Ezekiel has this vision. And that vision continues all the way to chapter 8. So his second vision is in chapter 8. So everything that happens from chapter 1 to 7 is dated in the 5th day of the 4th month. Now, an objection was brought up regarding this where in chapter 3, it talks about it came to pass at the end of 7 days that the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, I've made thee a watchman over the house of Israel. And when you do a superficial reading of this, you think that 7 days has actually passed by in Ezekiel chapter 1. But that 7 days is actually 7 days in vision. So he's in vision this whole time when he's writing this. So he's writing about what happened to him in vision. And I can show this in other places where the same types of things happen. So he's in vision and he's describing what happens in vision. So that 7 days is not actual 7 days that are passing in real time. It's in his vision. He goes to a place called Tel Aviv, which is not the Tel Aviv in Israel, but Tel Aviv in Babylon. And he sits there astonished for 7 days among the elders of Israel. So I'm just going to touch on that. I do actually have a paper where I deal with it in detail. But we're not going to touch on that. That would take too much time. So we're then assuming now that Ezekiel chapter 4 is still in the 5th day of the 4th month. And it says in verse 4 of Ezekiel 4, lie thou upon thy left side. I'll bring up my computer program here for you to look at. So it says, lie thou upon thy left side. So I'm going to go back. Let's go right back to verse 1. Thou also, son of man, take thee a tile and lay it before thee, and portray upon it the city, even Jerusalem. Lay siege against it, and build a fort against it, and cast a mount against it. And set the camp also against it, and set battering rams against it round about. Moreover, take thou unto thee an iron pan, and set it for a wall of iron between thee and the city, and set thy face against it, and it shall be besieged, and thou shalt lay siege against it. This shall be a sign to the house of Israel. Lie thou also upon thy left side, and lay the iniquity of the house of Israel upon it. According to the number of the days that thou shalt lie upon it, thou shalt bear their iniquity. For I have laid upon thee the years of their iniquity, according to the number of the days, 390 days. So shalt thou bear the iniquity of the house of Israel. And when thou hast accomplished them, lie again on thy right side, and thou shalt bear the iniquity of the house of Judah 40 days. I have appointed thee each day for a year. So he's setting up this, and we're not going to go through this all in detail of what happens here, but we know here he's setting up this acting out of the siege, and he's predicting when the siege is going to happen, or he's predicting the siege based upon this portrayal and this acted out parable, so to speak, or acted out prophecy. And so he's going to predict the year of the siege, right? So that's the first thing that we know. He's predicting something that's going to happen, and he's using two different numbers, 390 and 40. And he's asked to lay up on his left side for 390 days and his right side for 40 days. So this left and right side, and when he does it, he's going to flip over. Now, he's not going to lay there continually. He's actually going to just do that at nighttime. He's going to be bound, so he won't turn over in his sleep. And so when he sleeps, he's going to be facing this portrayal of the siege. And so when I deal with this later, I'll deal with this idea of why the 390 and 40 left and right. But for now, this is going to be Israel, and this is Judah. Now, I have seen some commentators who have suggestions about this, of how this might connect back to here. So what they're going to do is they're going to say, well, it might connect back to somehow the history of northern Israel. But they don't really know where to place it. And since they don't know where to place it, they don't know where it's going to end. So, and that was part of the problem. So since I had the dividing of the kingdom here in 977, I had a starting point that I could look at, and I could say, well, in 977, we're going to have 390 years. And if I'm going to do that, I would just simply go here, and we're going to have 587, and I'm just going to count back from here to here, and I'm saying, well, that's 390 years. And if that's 390 years, well, this would be when the siege began, and that happens to be the year when the siege begins. So I thought that was very interesting in seeing that there's 390. Now, the other question was the 40 years. So most people would add these together. So sometimes you'll see people try to, because they'll have like much shorter periods. If you're using the modern chronology of Edmund Thiel, you're going to have this being like 938 or 939 or something like that. So you're going to have like 932, I think it is. Anyway, it's way shorter period. So let's say if they put it over here at 932 BC, obviously you can't get 390 years fitting in here in any way. So you can't use the modern chronology to connect it back to here, but you might try to connect it back maybe into David's reign or something like that. So there's just lots of different problems that arises if you don't have the correct chronology. So based upon all this, I had this date. And so then I could lay this 390 years over here. Now, the other thing, though, is we had the 40 years. So I'm going to put it over here. It's not in proportion. So I would say, well, if this is 587, 40 years should be 627. So, but I didn't know really what event to look for in here. And it wasn't until I really started working out the detailed chronologies of the kings of Judah in here to understand when all the kings began to reign and when the years of their reign lined up, that I really could then place this date and the event. Now, as I said, we have this 15th day of the 8th month. And so when we put this date here, the 15th day of the 8th month, in this year, we have an interesting prophecy, and that's the prophecy of Josiah. So we're going to go there, and that's in 1 Kings chapter 13, verse 1 to 5. And okay, so 1 Kings chapter 13, verse 1 to 5. And behold, there came a man of God out of Judah by the word of the Lord unto Bethel, and Jeroboam stood by the altar to burn incense. And he cried against the altar in the word of the Lord, and said, "Oh, altar, altar." So we have, a doubling, which symbolizes midnight cry. Thus saith the Lord God, behold, a child shall be born into the house of David, Josiah by name. And upon thee shall he offer the priests of the high places that burn incense upon thee, and men's bones shall be burnt upon thee. And he gave a sign the same day, saying, this is the sign which the Lord has spoken. Behold, the altar shall be rent, and the ashes that are upon it shall be poured out. Now, there's a bunch more stuff that happens, so I'm not going to deal with that here. But it's a prophecy about Josiah. So here we have this prophecy of Josiah stated here. And this prophecy is given on the 15th day of the 8th month. So it becomes an interesting symbol that we then have to address a little bit later. Now, I have this 390, and this fits nice. But then I'm going to say, well, if there's 40 years here, what happens in this year? And as I started to study this out, I came to...
Can you unshare?
What's that?
Can you unshare?
Unshare. Oh, sorry there. Yeah. Okay, there we go. So we got the prophecy of Josiah here in 977 on the 15th day of the 8th month. And we have this year, which I've marked out as being 40 years. And it's going to bring me to 627. And so then I have to say what happened in 627. And as I started to study this, I found this is in the history of Josiah. Now, Josiah, remember when we were looking at those 30 years in I always do this backwards. So yeah, it's over here. I'm going to move this over a little bit. I need a bit more room here. So it's 627. This is going to be 40 years. And in 622 BC, this was where that 30 years began. Now, in looking at this history, this is in the 18th year of Josiah. And this here would then be in the 13th year of Josiah. And we find that in the 12th year of Josiah, he actually began this work of tearing down these altars. And we find that in two places. But let's look at, so I'll go back. I got to share, and I got to remember to unshare the screen. So let's go back to 2 Kings this time. And we're going to go to chapter 23. And starting at verse 18, or verse 15. So, and there was a puzzle here that I had to solve, and it wasn't evident at first. So here's where the prophecy is fulfilled, and it was trying to date this. So in 2 Kings 23, verse 15, it says, I gotta hit the share button. Moreover, the altar that was at Bethel and the high place which Jeroboam the son of Nebat, who made Israel to sin, had made, both that altar and the high place he brake down, and burned the high place, and stamped it small to powder, and burned the grove. And as Josiah turned himself, he spied the sepulchres that were in the mount, and sent and took the bones out of the sepulchres, and burned them upon the altar, and polluted it, according to the word of the Lord, which the man of God proclaimed, who proclaimed these words. And then he said, what title is that I see? And the men of the city told him, and it is the sepulchre of the man of God, which came from Judah, and proclaimed these things that thou hast done against the altar of Bethel. He said, let him alone, let no man move his bones. So they let his bones alone with the bones of the prophet that came out of Samaria. So anyway, you can see that this is obviously the fulfillment of 1 Kings chapter 13, verse 1 to 5. It's filled here in 2 Kings chapter 23, verse 15 to 18. So now the problem here was initially dating this. When did this happen? Well, if you read chapter 23, you'll find that this is happening when this is actually happening in 622. So they're talking about events in 622 on the diagram that I drew, which is where they start counting the Jubilee cycle in Ezekiel. So, but there's a key here. So one is it says all these things that Josiah did, and then verse 15 starts with this word, moreover. Now this word here in English kind of gives a sense of it, but this is basically saying, and other things he did. So these are not things that were happening in 622. These are things that were happening earlier. And so where we find this is in 2 Chronicles. I should have the chapter memorized. I don't. There's Hezekiah's Passover. Josiah.
34.
Yeah. Yeah. What's
Yeah, 34.
Yeah, chapter 34. Yeah, I just got onto it there. Thanks. So Josiah was 8 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned in Jerusalem 31 years. And he did that which was right in the sight of the Lord, and walked in the ways of David his father, and declined neither to his right nor to his left. For in the 8th year of his reign, while he was yet young, he began to seek after God of David his father. And it says in the 12th year of his reign, he began to purge Judah and Jerusalem from the high places, and the groves, and the carved images, and the molten images. And they break down the altars of Baalim in his presence, and the images that were on high above them he cut down, and the groves, and the carved images, and the molten images. Right? And he burned in verse 5, he burnt the bones of the priests upon their altars, and cleansed Judah and Jerusalem. And so did he in the cities of Manasseh, and Ephraim, and Simeon, even unto Naphtali. So all of Israel he went through, and he destroyed all these altars. And when he had broken down the altars and the groves, and had beaten the graven images into powder, and cut down all the idols throughout all the land of Israel, he returned to Jerusalem. Now, it doesn't give us an exact timeline of when he did this, but it does tell us that he began in the 12th year of his reign. It doesn't say when in the 12th year of his reign that he began this, but he began in his 12th year, and he began in Judah and Jerusalem. Now, the altar in Bethel is in the south of northern Israel, where the altar in Dan was in the north. And so it's at the altar of Bethel that he then fulfills the prophecy of Josiah. Now, in trying to look at this timeline, I can't prove, because it doesn't say there, which year it occurred. But it does tell me something. It tells me that if it was in the 13th year of his reign, that there is 40 years between here and here. And that means there is 350 years here to make up that 390 years. And since the prophecy of Josiah is given here and it's fulfilled here, it's logical that Ezekiel is using these two events to start the 390 years and the 40 years, right? So some people would say, well, that's an assumption. But the thing is, we have two witnesses, right? We have these spans of time that work, and they work with this prophecy. But there's also more to it in that we also recognize in Ezekiel chapter 1 that he's referencing this event here in the life of Josiah. So the fact that Ezekiel is referencing Josiah, not in a direct way. He doesn't mention Josiah's name. He just mentions this year, this where the Passover occurs. This is the year that they then begin a Jubilee cycle. Now, when it comes to the Jubilee sabbatical cycles, there are people who try to determine when these occur. And I've seen every single explanation. I started studying Jubilee cycles back in 1980. Man, it must have been 85. So, because I had friends who were doing the 1987 Jubilee. So they believed Jesus was coming back in 1987. So I started studying Jubilee and sabbatical cycles back then. And I've seen every sort of theory on how we can determine which year is a Jubilee cycle and which year is a sabbatical cycle. But what I think is actually happening in Ezekiel when he talks about this Jubilee cycle is it's not the Jubilee cycle that started at the Exodus. It's just a Jubilee cycle that he's now using to reference Josiah. So the very fact that he references this Jubilee cycle that ties us to Josiah's Passover in 622 would also imply that then he's going to be referencing in that vision events in the life of Josiah. And so to put this fulfillment of this prophecy here in the 13th year, it's also interesting that Jeremiah begins his ministry in the 13th year of Josiah. So this is also the year in which Jeremiah begins his ministry. So now the 40 years then that are going to go from here to here, we would just simply put there's 5 years here. Between here and there is 30 years because that's the 30th year, right, that he's marking. And then we're going to have another 5 years going to here. And so you can see there's your 40 years made up. So this little puzzle becomes interesting. Now I'm going to share another screen here with you as soon as I find it. I have to open it up. So one of the things in working out the kings of Judah, I went through this long, complicated 2-year process of reading tons and tons of material that in some ways I could have taken a shortcut. I could have read the Spirit of Prophecy and accepted what she says about things, but I also could have accepted some of the things the Bible said. So I read a lot of stuff people wrote, got really, really confused because there was so much disagreement regarding the chronology of the kings of Judah. So I finally had to work it all out myself. And it was interesting in doing so that I ended up finding out that my chronology, I could have done it a simpler way. So it's kind of hard to explain, but I'll show you the simple way in which it could have been done, which I didn't figure out until later. So I'm going to bring up this chart here. See how good it looks. This probably should work pretty good. Okay. So hopefully this is, people can see this. It is pretty small print. So what I've done is, and you can check this out, is I simply looked at the Bible verses where it talks about how long each of the kings of Judah reigned and each of the kings of Israel reigned. And I wrote down the years that are given in the Bible. And so what I found is that if I just added them up, I came up to 391 years and 6 months. And that's because there's 3 months for Jehoiachin and 3 months for Jehoahaz. And then, but it worked perfectly with the chronology that I'd already worked out by complicated lining up the kings of Judah and the kings of Israel, because it also will tell us in which year the king of Israel, the king of Judah began to reign, and which year of the king of Israel that the king of Judah began to reign, and vice versa. I can't remember. I might have said it the same way both times. But the point is, you work out this chart, and it was very complicated, drawing out this chart, figuring out which ones were spring to spring, which one for fall to fall. But then I found if I just took these totals and added them up, the only thing that I had to account for is this 2-year co-regency that is mentioned in the Bible regarding Jehoshaphat and his son Jehoram. And it's very complicated to figure it out because there's also another king, Joram, who's also called Jehoram at time, and Jehoram sometimes called Joram. One's a king of Israel, and one's a king of Judah, and their reigns overlap. So that was really confusing reading it. So I had to figure out how these different reigns overlap to figure out the 2-year co-regency. But it's the same, Usher has that same 2-year co-regency, and it's pretty well recognized that that's how long Jehoram and Jehoshaphat reigned at the same time. So that's the only difference that I have to do mathematically to adjust for it. So when I added all these up, it's 391 years and 6 months. And that was exactly how long that I had starting Rehoboam's reign in 597 and working out all the details of all the reigns of these kings. Some are spring to spring and some are fall to fall for Judah. But it ends up being 391 years and 6 months. And so the fact that that worked out perfectly.
What's
that, Clayton?
I see what the star means for its ascension years, but you have some that are marked with a T. What's that mean?
Those are going to be fall to fall. So most of the times the king of Judah is spring to spring, but somewhere, and I'm not sure exactly where, but sometimes it could have even been in Hezekiah's reign, but most likely in Manasseh's reign, that they changed to a fall to fall calendar. So after Samaria was destroyed, after northern Israel was destroyed, they kept their reigns of their kings fall to fall. And so as part of the rebellion that happened in Judah, they ended up adopting a fall to fall reign. So they weren't doing the spring to spring reign that God had set up with Saul and David and Solomon. So that's what happens there. Zedekiah is put back to a spring to spring reign because he's put on the throne by the king of Babylon, and the king of Babylon counts the years of his reign spring to spring. So Jehoiachin, the years of his captivity are fall to fall, just like the years of his reign, where Zedekiah's years of reign are spring to spring. So this was one of the things that I've figured out that actually solved the problem. So a good question there. So when we count these, we can tell, based upon all of these spans of time, that it's 391 years and 6 months. So it's meant to be added up to give you a total. The way that these were written out in the Bible was not in some mysterious way that we have to do a bunch of weird math and so forth. It was meant to be added as a total. And we see this when we look at the ages of the birthdays or the years that in Genesis, when Adam, how old he was when he had his son. These were all made to add up to have a total. They were, in a sense, rounded already for us. We didn't have to try to calculate in some way and figure out, because you can see that they all fit together in a puzzle that way. So the point was, there was this simple way I could have done it. I could have just looked at the verses where it says how long the kings reigned, and then I could have just added them up I could have noticed the 2-year co-regency, and then I could have just done my total, and I would have come to 977 for the reign of Rehoboam and Jeroboam. I didn't do it that way until after all that long time. Now, the advantage of that is I now understood a lot of the problems that existed and why people did things the way they did it, so that I could actually argue against them. So I could show where they were wrong in their assumptions. So, you know, one of the weird things about Edwin Thiele's chronology is you get some of the kings of Judah having sons when they're 3 years old, which I don't think is possible. So he didn't take into account that when he tried to shorten the reigns of the kings of Judah in that way, that he had to look at how old people were when they had their sons and how old their sons were. So it just does not work to shorten that total like the modern chronology does. But see, the modern chronology doesn't care, because if something doesn't fit, it's just a typo in the Bible, right? So their theories about the chronology override the plain words of Scripture. And so you can't do that. So that 391 years and 6 months fits. And you can see as we start to answer the question that Clayton asked at the beginning, is we now know that this period of the siege is a year and a half. And this 391 years and 6 months then goes to Zedekiah. And this Zedekiah then is in 586. And this is going to be July 18th, when the wall of the city are broken down. And that he's going to be, I always do the D backwards, don't ask me why. So this is interesting. One is it's the date, the 9th day of the 4th month, July 18th, 586, and you have this year and a half in here. Now, if you count on our calendar, this is January that this happens, and July 18th is obviously in the 7th month. And if you count on our calendar, this is roughly what we would call 18 months. Right? So you're going to go from here to there. It's going to be 18 months. On the biblical calendar, they actually have an extra month added in there, so it's 19 months, which I think is significant as a symbol, but be that as it may, it's still a year and a half, no matter how you look at it. Now, I've seen Elder Jeff put this up, and he always gets a little bit confused about it, because he tries to add like a 0.5 here, but there's actually a year and a half here. So when we looked at the prophecy, and we're going to deal that when we go through Revelation, but we know that the Josiah Litch has a prophecy that's 391 years and 15 days. But this whole prophecy, and we're going to see this when we start looking at actually that this is the date that Ezekiel is predicting. So on the surface, he's predicting this siege, right? So we all understand that that's what it's talking about. But as we start to look at his acted out prophecy and some of his other prophecies, he's actually predicting this date, or more specifically, a month later, he's predicting the 10th day of the 5th month. And this date that comes from Ezekiel becomes really important later on. And we're gonna look at that. We're gonna look at that he's not just predicting the date here in 586 that the temple is going to be destroyed, but he's also predicting that date in 70 AD. And we can show that from this prophecy, which I think is extremely fascinating. So we have this year and a half, 18 months in our calendar to here. That'd be 19 months in our calendar to here. On the Jewish calendar, it's 19 months and 20 months because they have an extra month. But the idea here is that this whole prophecy is 391 years and a half to come to this history here when Jerusalem is going to be destroyed over this 30-day period. So this is the 391.5. So if I write this up here, 391.5, and that's the reigns of the kings of Judah. So specifically the reigns of the kings of Judah, because Zedekiah is going to be killed here. as 391 and a half years. But it's almost like exactly 391 and a half years. If you go through this history, you're going to realize that Jeroboam, he has to come to the throne before the 15th day of the 8th month, because there's a whole history in here of Rehoboam is made king when Solomon dies, and there's a period of time in which this rebellion occurs, and all these different events in the rebellion. He has to set up these altar in Dan and the altar in Bethel, and then he sets up this false feast day where he offers as a priest and a king, church and state are combined, and this prophecy of Josiah is given. And so there's so much symbolic significance regarding Jeroboam's rebellion and what it symbolizes, and how it's connected to here, to this history, but even more specifically to 70 AD, and even more specifically than that to our time. And so these details that occur in Ezekiel's prophecy are obviously providential. They can't be something that would be, that we can't just look at them as coincidence. There's just too many things that fit. Now, this is the way the prophecy was understood in 2016. But I want to address a few more points regarding some of the details. But before we do that, does anybody have any questions? Anything not making sense? So Stephen has a question.
Yeah, I'd just like to also add that the prophecy of Jeroboam is also connecting with there's a potential there to connect with the sealing of the 144,000, in that the two tribes not mentioned in the list of the tribes in Revelation chapter 7 is Dan and Ephraim, and that's where the two golden calves were.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So, Stephen is saying that the history of Jeroboam, where he sets up these calves, Dan and Bethel, we know that Bethel is in the territory of Ephraim. And Ephraim and Dan are not mentioned in Revelation chapter 7 regarding the names of the 12 tribes. So one is we can look at this. There's so many things that are, so many details that exist here in this prophecy that show that it's significant for our time at the end of the world, that it's not just a prophecy where Ezekiel is predicting the destruction of Jerusalem. Any other?
Yeah, I have a question about, I'm having trouble correlating the 390, which I can see in Ezekiel chapter 4, with the 391 and a half. I can't seem to get that connection in my mind. Now I see the 391 and a half very clearly based upon the table that you brought up, but how do I bring those two together in my mind?
Okay, so I'm going to deal with that in a lot more detail later on, but I can show you some things that can help you right now without going into all that detail. So let's look at it this way. We know that Ezekiel's going to lie on his left side and his right side, and he's going to start over here on the 5th day of the 4th month. And he's going to lie on his left side for 390 days. And then for 40 days, he's going to lie on his right side. And he's pointing to the siege here. So the date that this 390 is pointing this way, and this 40 is pointing this way, because he's lying on his left side looking at the siege. And then for the 40 days, he flips over and he lies on his right side looking at the siege. And so what this tells us is that these 390 and this 40 aren't to be added together to be 430 years from some date to the siege, but they're both pointing back to the same point. Now, the literal number of days that he lays on his left side, the last day that he lays on his left side is the 10th day of the 5th month. Okay? So I don't know if people can see that. Maybe I need to make it bigger. The 10th day of the 5th month. Now we know that this is a significant day because that's the date that Jerusalem is destroyed. Now, we know that this was July 21st, and this is the 5th day of the 4th month. So he's going to lie on his left side, and he completes that last day is the 10th day of the 5th month. And then he's going to lie on his right side for 40 days. And the first day that he lies on his right side is August 15th. And a simple way of looking at this is if you go from July 21st to August 15th, it's 390 days. Right? So it's a simple way of looking at it. Now, so this is at that evening, that night, on the 10th day of the 5th month, he's going to begin lying for the last time on his left side. The next morning he wakes up, it's August 15th, and that night he's going to lie on his right side for 40 days. And so one is it gives us this symbol, the 10th day of the 5th month. Now we know later, and it's interesting too, his second vision, which happens on in Ezekiel chapter 8, his second vision happens 25 days after he's laying on his left side, if you work out the chronology. But then we know he's going to have another vision over here, and this is his third vision. And his third vision is in chapter 20, starts in chapter 20, and the date that vision is given is also the 10th day of the 5th month. So this one is hidden, right? This 10th day of the 5th month is hidden. You don't know it unless you really work out the details of him lying on his left and his right side. So this one's hidden, but it's also tied to the midnight cry symbolism. Now we know that this is midnight, and this is the midnight cry. So the fact that his vision gives us both July 21st and August 15th, and also the symbol for midnight over here, and then this symbol, which we're going to apply into the future. From here, he's got it also here, and then we know Jerusalem is destroyed on the 10th day of the 5th month in 586. So this is in 590, so this is 4 years, 591. So this is 5 years before Jerusalem's destroyed to the very day. And this is 4 years before Jerusalem is destroyed to the very day. So he's here having this vision, but he's also predicting not just the siege, he's predicting the date of the destruction of Jerusalem. And if you read in Ezekiel 20, you'll see that 20 to 24, so he goes from Ezekiel 20 to 24, so I guess basically 20 to 23, those 4 chapters, he's describing the destruction of Jerusalem. And then in 24 verse 1, he's told that the siege has begun. So he's told on this date, which is going to be the 10th day of the 10th month. And if you look there, let's look there. So I know I'm telling you all these things, but let's look at these verses. So let's go to Ezekiel chapter 20. So it says, it came to pass in the 7th year, in the 5th month, the 10th day of the month, that certain of the elders of Israel came to inquire of the Lord and sat before me. So this is the 5th month, the 10th day of the month, just like it was when he ended his lying on his left side. And then the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, speak unto the elders of Israel, and say unto them, Thus saith the Lord God, Are ye come to inquire of me? As I live, saith the Lord God, I will not be inquired of by you. And he's going to talk about all the judgments that are going to come upon them, just as God has judged other nations. And so you're going to find that, you read that, chapter 21, Son of man, set thy face toward Jerusalem, and drop thy word toward the holy places, and prophesy against the land of Israel. And chapter 22 talks about the bloody city. Chapter 23 it talks about these two women and what they symbolize. That the Babylonians are basically going to come and destroy the city. And then in chapter 24, verse 1, it says, again, in the 9th year, in the 10th month, in the 10th day of the month, so that's at the beginning of 587, that the siege begins. So in trying to connect that together, we can see, at least on this level, Ezekiel is predicting not just a 390-year period, but he's predicting this event, which happens 391 and a half years later, right? So let's just stop the share. Does that help a little bit, Clayton? I can't hear you.
Yes, it does. It's just I need to continue to study it more because I'm still struggling with it a little bit on how to explain it better to others is really what I'm trying to get to. And there, when we use the 6 months, for example, in the prediction of July 18th, we take that as 180 years. And for me to try to uncouple that half of a year to 180 years when it's applied this way in this instance is difficult for me.
Yes, I can see what you're saying. So here, we're looking at literal years. They're going to be symbolic later on. Somebody else have a question? No? Somebody's mic is on. Yeah. Sandor, do you have a question? Okay, I'm not sure what's happening there. So,
Sandor, we're getting background noise from your mic.
yeah, I'll just mute everybody. Okay, so I muted them. People can still unmute themselves. So,
Anyways, that's fine. I mean, you're helping me. I'm just saying that 6 months to 180 years is hard for me when it's.
yes, to add it to make the 5 months 180. Now there's a bunch of pieces we're still missing. If I try to explain it to you, one is it's not prepared here in this lecture to do that. But the one thing I can say about this, which I'm going to go into more detail later, but we saw how Ezekiel was counting the years of the captivity. And the years of the captivity, I'm going to erase this up here. Do this. Because I do want to go into this in more detail in some of my other studies, because I think it's extremely significant. And I have touched on it already. But Ezekiel's back here in 592, but he's referencing an event that happens in 597. And this is when he's taken captive. And so he's counting the years of the captivity from here. And he's going to say that this is the 5th year. Now, remember, we kept counting, and we found that the year of the captivity, starting in the fall of 573, which is really the Jewish year of 574, or 572, if we really wanted to look at it. That would be, the year starts in the fall of 573, but it's really the year 572. That's the 25th year. So you can see we're adding 20 here. And then we know that in 561, Jehoiachin is released from captivity, and that's going to be in the 37th year of his captivity, which is actually 36 years here. So, but it's the 37th year. So I'm not going to go into the details of that. But if we keep counting along and we come up to 70 AD, when was the temple destroyed in 70 AD?
10th day, 5th month.
So we have the same date that we had here, this 10th day of the 5th month. Now, if we keep counting this count and we come along, we will find that this is the 666th year in the way that Ezekiel is counting of the captivity. Now, we also notice that there is 36 years at the beginning here for Jehoiachin's personal captivity. But we also know that this occurs after the close of probation for the Hebrew. There's 36 years here. There's two different ways I can count this. I can count this as the 666th year, but I can also just plainly count from 597 because there is a 0th year here in the way that he counts anyway. So from 597 to 70 AD is 666 years, and it's prefaced by a 36-year period. It's appended by another 36-year period. And we know that if we take the numbers 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 all the way up to plus 6, they add up to 666. And we studied this before, that this is Leviticus 26, and this is Deuteronomy 28. And Deuteronomy 28 talks about the siege of Jerusalem by Rome, and in Leviticus 26 it deals with the siege of 597 by Babylon. For some reason, that mic is still on mute. So I don't know why that's happening. But anyway, we got, so does that make sense? We can see that this 666 years. Now, the destruction of Jerusalem is a type of the end of the world. So we already know that, right? Just by reading the first chapter of the Great Controversy, but also by reading Matthew 24 and 25, you know, we can see that the events that happen here in 70 AD are connected with the events in our time. But we can also see that the events that happen here in 586, that happen in 597, all these events dealing with Jerusalem in the past also relate to our time. So one of the things I could say about that 0.5 years being 180 years is there's a number of different ways that we can do it. So we already had the year 2020 and July 18th before we even counted the 180 years being based on a 0.5. And the way that we did that was looking at Ezekiel 20. And Ezekiel 20 already had the symbol of the 10th day of the 5th month. And then when I went to where's it here? I have a diagram of it, but I don't know where it would be. So, well, let's go look at Ezekiel 20 itself. So I open that up, and let's go back to Ezekiel 20. So there's a number of things about Ezekiel 20 that's interesting. In Ezekiel chapter 3, when he has, I think it's Ezekiel chapter 3. No, it's not Ezekiel 3. Ezekiel. Okay, let's just skip that. I can't remember where it is. So Ezekiel 20, we know that he has this vision that's in the 10th day of the 5th month. And of course, it's in Ezekiel 20. So part of what happened is we already had a timeline based upon the prophecy of Josiah, so the prophecy of Josiah Lich, that tied us with November 9th, 2019. So we already had Josiah Lich's prophecy in the 391 years and 15 days. And we already have 391 and a half years in the prophecy of Ezekiel. And that prophecy of Ezekiel is based upon the prophecy of Josiah, King Josiah. Now, it's a 390-year prophecy, but we can see that they're connected. Now, when I then looked at Ezekiel 20 and this 10th day of the 5th month, of course, it struck me that it's Ezekiel 20, so I think the year 2020. But also in Ezekiel 20:20 is one of the key verses in Ezekiel, and hallow my Sabbaths, and they shall be a sign between me and you, that you may know that I am the Lord thy God. Now, it's also in Ezekiel 20:12, but this is also in Exodus 31:13. Speak thou also unto the children of Israel, saying, verily my Sabbaths ye shall keep, for it is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that ye may know that I am the Lord that doth sanctify you. So we have this reference back to the Sabbath in Ezekiel 20:20, and Exodus 31:13. I've always been struck that it's a mirror, and I know that 13 is the number of rebellion, and it's also a number of Islam. So there's some symbolism there that I looked at, and 13 is also a reverse of the year 31 AD, in which Jesus was crucified, being made a curse for us, in the middle of a prophetic mirror. Now, so when I go back to Ezekiel, and I look at the context of what this is about the destruction of Jerusalem. Now, it is about the destruction of Jerusalem in 586, but it's also about the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. Now, Ezekiel is predicting the destruction of Jerusalem in 586. Whether or not he knows it, he's also predicting the date for the destruction of the Jerusalem in 70 AD. And he's connecting this with, or we're connecting it, using Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28, and finding that these two events are 666 years apart, and that they create a structure that is based on 36 years at the beginning, 36 years at the end. And so we can argue that even though Ezekiel is just predicting, using the prophecy of Josiah, he's just predicting the siege and the date for the destruction of Jerusalem in 586. We can then apply the same principle to Josiah Lich's prophecy, because Josiah Lich is predicting events in the 1840s. He has no clue that his prophecy could be used to predict events 180 years into the future. And so when we start to look at the parallels between Ezekiel's prophecy based on Josiah and Josiah Lich's prophecy of Revelation 9, we can start to understand that we can apply his prophecy into the future just the same way that we apply Ezekiel's prophecy into the future, into 70 AD. But more than that, we also could see that we could apply Ezekiel's prophecy into our time, using this 10th day of the 5th month, which happened to be July 18th. And then when we used Ezekiel prophecy, the symbol there was the 26th day of the 4th month. And it also happened to be July 18th, though this time on the Gregorian. So Ezekiel gives us a Julian date of July 18th, and Josiah Lich gives us a Gregorian date of July 18th. Now, there's more to it than that, but in a sense, when we look at the 0.5 and we turn it into 180 years, that's not actually how we derived 2020. That was an analysis of Josiah Lich's prophecy after the fact, if we want to put it that way. Now, I shouldn't say it so much that way because it definitely helped us in placing it that way. But to look at the 26th day of the 4th month as we just took the 0.5 years and we just made it 180 years, and then that's it. There's a lot more to it than that. So we could argue that the 26th day of the fourth month, even without that 0.5, there's other ways that we could have derived it. And so one of the things that I did is I used the structure of the 391 years and looked at these spans of time. And I used also the Mayan calendar to help me with that. So the Mayan calendar is a day count calendar. And the interesting thing about the Mayan calendar is that it starts on the 10th day of the fifth month in 3113 BC. So we have that 3113 there. And the date is August 11th. So we have this Mayan calendar already back a while ago. And so in using the Mayan calendar, I also came to the same conclusions using these symbolism. So I'm not going to do a presentation on that. I do have a paper that goes through it in detail. But my point is that in trying to explain it to people, because I think that's the concern that you have mostly, is that, and I'm just going to bring this up here again. So in trying to bring this up, I'm going to do a new share. There. And I just want to go back to this, back to Exodus. So the fact that Exodus 31:13 gives me this symbol dealing with, that ties me to Ezekiel 20:20 and to Ezekiel 20:12. Does anybody remember what was going to happen in the year 2012? According to, false prophecy out there.
It was the end of their calendar.
Yeah, well, that's what people thought. They thought it was the end of their calendar, which it wasn't. It was the end of one of their cycles in their calendar. So that 31:13 becomes extremely significant for me because it ties this 2020 in Ezekiel with Exodus 31:13, but it also ties us with the year in which the Mayan calendar begins. And it ties us in the year when the Mayan calendar changes from the 12th Bactan to the 13th Bactan. And that date is December 21st, 2012. And that date is 13.0.0.0.0 on the Mayan calendar. So the day before, it was 12, 19, 19, 19, 18, 19. So it's very, very interesting. So they thought the calendar ended, but it just moved to the 13th Bactan. But I've used that Mayan calendar and that date as spans of time in our lines. So that date became significant from a biblical prophecy point of view. Now, some people would question, well, how we're using a Mayan calendar. Now, we have a Gregorian calendar, which is a papal calendar. We have the Julian calendar, which is a pagan Roman calendar. So those are both Roman calendars. We also use the Islamic calendar in prophecies dealing with Islam. We also have the biblical calendar and the rabbinic calendar. And of course, we can even use the Karaite calendar, another one of those calendars, in prophecy. But what's the American calendar that exists before America exists? The Mayan calendar is not just the Mayans. The evidence is that all over North America and Central America, that this day count calendar was the way that they counted time in the Americas. And I think that's very, very fascinating. So what we're looking at is we're looking at American calendar, not United States of America, but America as it exists before, when it's this wilderness, as if you want to call it that way, when the wilderness that the woman fled to. And so that Mayan calendar has prophetic significance, but there's even more to it in just the structure of it and the symbols that it has in it. So it has 144,000 in it as part of their sum of their day counts. And it also has 360 in it. So the Mayan calendar has all these numbers that are biblical numbers. And so just to address that issue that somebody's saying, why are you using this calendar? One is it works. It shows us a whole bunch of things related to Bible prophecy. But it also has symbolic significance regarding America itself. So the land of America as the wilderness. So I think that God has given us all these calendars to tell us something about time. And as I've talked about before, calendars are representative of something to do with the natural cycles, either the day, sunrise to sunset, or sunset to sunrise, or sunset to sunset, sometimes noon to noon, sometimes midnight to midnight. Different types of calendars count the days differently. We also have the month, the calendars. Some calendars use the month, and some calendars use the year. So our calendar is a solar calendar. The biblical calendar is a lunar solar. The Islamic calendar is purely lunar, and the Mayan calendar is purely a day count calendar. So when we deal with this hour, day, month, and year that you see in Josiah Litch's prophecy, I think that's symbolic. And we've also been able to measure spans of time, like 1,533 weeks and 1,533 days, 3,910 weeks and 5 days to represent 391.5. So God's given us, and even mentioning hours to deal with the 1533 in the hours, dealing with the that remainder that happens from 1844, from basically Pentecost, when Christ begins his ministry in the holy place, to October 22nd, 1844, and then the 1,844 days and the 318 days. So I know that some of you may not know what I'm talking about who are watching this. But my point is, God has used all these hours, days, months, and years in a symbolic sense, and he has calendars that use hours or days, months, and years. And we can look at, even in the Hebrew calendar, how they count their hours. All these things are really fascinating detail that God has given us. So this is that wheel, those wheels within wheels of Ezekiel that at first appear complex, but after they are examined, we see that they have perfect order. And I think that these calendars are given to us to aid us in understanding Bible prophecy, because they're helping us understand the sky. Even though we can't go back and look at the sky and it wouldn't mean much to us, we can use calendars that take us back into the past, and we can recognize that these times, these dates, are anchored upon the sun and the moon and the stars that are given for signs, for seasons, and for days and years. So I hope that helps a little bit in that explanation. Any other questions that people might have? I know some people may feel that this one has gone over their heads, especially parts of it. But we're going to go through this in more detail, and I'm going to be sending you some more papers. Part of the problem I had here is I didn't really have notes prepared for this one. So I had prepared notes for some of the other lectures. And we are going to go through one of the papers is the overview. Later on, we're going to go through the overview of July 18th, 2020, but that's going to be a bit later on. After you sort of understand it, then we're going to go through that overview paper. But we're going to probably deal next time with the literal 390 days. So I skimmed over it here, but we're going to go through it in a bit more detail. And the other thing that I really want to do is to get people to know how to use the tools. So if we go back to me sharing this screen, So this, the notes that we use today, we have all of this, all this chronology, and as I said, some of it I haven't corrected. So I've taken the view that this is now, I need to change a couple of these dates, not many, just a couple of them, based upon this calendar down here in the appendix. And I would suggest that people try to figure this out themselves. So take all these dates that I have in Ezekiel's visions, and they're listed here as well, and they're listed in this chart, and just spend some time going through them and comparing them with the calendar converter program if you want, and also with this chart from Parker and Duberstein's Babylonian chronology, and see if you can make sense out of it. So that would be my suggestion. So I know that was a long, quite detailed introduction to Ezekiel's prophecy. Any final questions? Because we can close with prayer here right away.
I have a question,
Okay,
or a comment anyway. Or
okay.
You mentioned about Ezekiel in chapter 1, verse 1. It references as 30 years, and some people consider that as 30 years you're a priest.
Yeah.
And I understand that there was the case, certainly in 1533 or 1532, when they came out of the land of Egypt.
Yeah.
And then set up the tabernacle. Mm-hmm. But in First Chronicles, chapter 23,
yeah,
verses 24 to 26, mentions that in the time of David, there was, it mentions the sons of Levi. It doesn't maybe specify the sons of Aaron, but the context does seem to be that it's those who are ministering in the tabernacle, so it would be the sons of Aaron. So you're seeing that it's actually, the age was reduced then from 30 to being 21 years old and upwards. So the time of
25 years old and upwards. Is it 25 or 20?
20,
I think.
20.
20 years. Yeah.
Sorry, 20 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm just thinking of the time of Ezekiel.
Yeah.
If he's referencing 30 years of being a priest, it's kind of by that time he would have been well qualified.
Yes, though here this is talking about just numbering them in some ways.
Well, in verse 24.
But yeah, I know in verse 24, because they do a poll, and they did the work for the service of the house of the Lord. Well, that still be Levites, not priests. But yeah, it's an interesting point. One is about the 30 years, though. I think it definitely has a symbolic reference to our history, the 30 years that we're in, as well as the idea that that's a priest. But yeah, I would have to look into that a little bit more. Okay, so our time is up. Let's close with prayer. And if anybody wants ask another question after, we can, but I'm going to pray and then end the recording. So let's kneel. Dear Father in heaven, we are so thankful for the time that we have to study. We pray for each person that they can spend time sorting these things out in their mind, whether they're true or not. Help us, Lord, to obey you in all things that you ask of us. We know, Lord, that our lives are not what they should be if we want to reflect your character fully. And so we just ask that you can work in our lives and that these truths can do a work upon our hearts. I pray for each person, for their families they represent. And I pray, Lord, again, for the influence that we can have in reaching out to others, those in our churches, and who are searching for truth in this 100 days of prayer. And we ask this and pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.